My name's Jamie Anderson. I'm a professor of leadership, teaching in Antwerp Management School. I've spent a big part of the last 10 years working with a lot of current and former professional cyclists, supporting them in life transitions and particularly transition after a pro cycling career. I'd like to invite also Brent Bookwalter onto the call. Brent is going to say a few words for us about the Pro Cyclist Foundation, who of course is the sponsor this evening. So hi Brent, welcome again to this, our third webinar in the series.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, it's great to be back with you guys. On behalf of the Pro Cyclist Foundation, welcome everyone to the third and final webinar in the series. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Pro Cyclist Foundation yet, the foundation's mission is to serve developing, current, and retired professional cyclists with career, wellness, and legal support. One of the real unique things about this foundation in the cycling world is that it's not tied to a team or governing body or nationality or even discipline in the sport. The foundation is based in the US and was founded there, but efforts across nationalities and throughout different disciplines in the cycling world are going to keep increasing as we go. This webinar series is really one of the foundation's first efforts into this wellness and psychology realm, but is one that I'm personally really passionate about. I think that a lot of our teams leave a hole there, and the foundation is really poised well to step in and get the dialogue going, which I hope this webinar has done, and educate and also provide services. So we'll tell you a little more about plans to roll that out through the foundation at the end of today's webinar. Yeah, again, we have a really great team here tonight. We have Dr. David Spindler, we have Professor Jamie Anderson. The expertise, experience, and wisdom that they provide in this area is really, really valuable, really high, and it's a unique opportunity. So whether you're watching it live or catching it on the YouTube channel as a recording, we hope you enjoy and really hope that you also reach out, tell us what you think about these webinars, tell us what we're missing, tell us what we're doing well, and we'll look forward to keep building that relationship with you, the athletes from the Pro Cyclist Foundation. And with that, we'll turn it back over to Professor Jamie and Dr. Spindler to get us going tonight.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Brent. And Dave, it'd be great for you, maybe also for those people who are maybe joining us for the first time this evening, say a few words to introduce yourself also.
Hello, everybody, wherever you're watching. My name's Dr. David Spindler. I'm a psychological and cognitive neuroscientist, specialising in endurance activity and athlete wellbeing. I'm contracted to some of the world's best teams, not just within that cycling sphere. I also have contracts with a major energy drink company. I have athletes that compete in Formula One, AMA Supercross, motocross, combat sports, but also MotoGP.
Absolutely great. And David, you're sounding much better this week. Last week's webinar, you were feeling a bit rough, having broken a couple of ribs. So it's good to see the old Dr. Spindler back again. Great to hear. Yeah. And of course, the other person who's always part of the team is Ramandeep Singh. He's supporting us from India. He's doing all the back end stuff in terms of the technology, registrations, and of course all those YouTube uploads as well. Now, just in terms of where we are and where we've come to, of course, this is webinar number 3. We've had 2 previous webinars, which you can of course watch on the Pro Cyclist Foundation YouTube channel. The first one was really on the fundamentals of mental health and wellness, understanding the, in a way, self-care strategies and the basis for, looking after yourself as an athlete, but also making sure that you have a bubble around you to support you. We then went into webinar number 2. Spent a lot of time there actually talking about sort of managing your mental health over the course of your career, especially dealing with stress and anxiety. And we introduced some really practical tips and approaches to help you out there. Now, this evening, what we're going to be talking about is actually career phases and transitions, and how you make those transitions successfully. Because, of course, David, you ready for the first prop this evening? Because, of course, what we want to do here on these webinars is help all of you to be stars. Now, not just, of course, stars during your competitive sporting career, but also stars after you leave the peloton and move on to other endeavors. So I'd like to start actually with a quote, David, because of course, one of the most, of course, famous cyclists of all time is Eddie Merckx. And Eddie Merckx once said that every professional dies twice. You know, and the first time is when they retire from competition. Now, for me, when I read that, I was like a little bit gloomy, you know, that in a way it was a pessimistic view of so-called retirement. However, you know, a guy who I admire is Jens Voigt, and he has an alternative opinion, because he says, you know, you can never retire from being awesome. So two ends of the spectrum there, David. So maybe what we would start with is just your take on those two quotes. You know, is ending competition a disaster, or is it the beginning of something great, or is it somewhere in between? What's your take on that, David?
Well, obviously it's a spectrum for a start, because it really depends on where I think the athlete puts their identity and their self, where they see themselves and who they think they are when during that career. From if we just look at those quotes, you could suggest that Eddie Merckx wraps his identity up quite closely within his cycling entity himself, and who he is a cyclist. I'm Eddie Merckx, a cyclist. Where Jens Voigt sees himself as, I'm Jens Voigt, the human, the person, the external to his performance. He is Jens Voigt, the father, and I'm not saying that Eddie wasn't that, but that's where he sees his self-reflection of that. So
yeah. It's very interesting you say that. I mean, I had a former top professional, you know, here at the hotel, the Flandern Hotel, just a few weeks ago, and it was very interesting seeing him interact with people during an event we had here, and some people were asking, you know, introducing themselves, and he was introducing himself as, yes, I am this person, the world champion, the champion, and he was referring to himself as the person he was actually about 15 years ago. So for me, that was very curious to observe that he was still in that mode in his identity as that person from 15 years ago. He wasn't introducing himself in a way in terms of what he's doing with his life today. Is that something typical you observed? I mean, is there a reason for that actually?
I think depending on the situation too, possibly. So maybe the person who came to the hotel read the room and thought, this is what these people are coming to see me as, so therefore I'm referring to myself as that. So I do see that situation quite often, because there's a separation between what people perceive as their different, you know, lives or columns of what their lives has seen, or chapters, or whatever you'd like to see. So yes, I have, most definitely.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, maybe we should take a step back a little bit, because obviously we're now talking about identity, and that, you know, obviously identity is very much tied to the individual, their character, their values, and how that evolves over time. But of course, when we start talking about the topic of transitions, there are actually for athletes quite distinct phases of transition.
Yes,
because I think many of us talk about competitive life and then post-competitive life as sort of two, but actually there are sub phases within that. So maybe you can talk us through this a little bit, and in terms of particularly in terms of the psychology of the shifts. And then particularly, we're going to focus here on some of the later phases, because tonight's topic, of course, will be that transition beyond life in the peloton. But maybe you just talk to us about that concept of transitions and phases over the course of an athlete's career.
Okay. So within all life, you should actually be transitioning into what your next phase should be. There should be some form of structure, and I find that athletes struggle with that structure because they don't understand or don't plan for what they're doing next. So it's really important to understand what these phases are, and then how you can then choose to work through the next phase, because the next phase is more important than the phase that you're in when it comes to this transition portion. So that initial phase, which is that talent recognition, and whether that talent is confirmed, and that's across each step within cycling as well. It's, you know, there's a tier system within cycling, and you may only reach an athlete may reach the third tier, or they may reach the second tier, or they may reach world tier. So where that is, and where you sit on that needs to be acknowledged of where that is, and then can I progress, or how can I progress? And then that second phase is actually you've realised the dream, and then how do I transition from that individual based notion of cycling to a team based sport? I've made it, but have I actually made it? Where does that then sit me within my peers? And then how do I then move to the next phase of my career as such? So you're transitioning from that neo-pro into, there's nuances within this phase as well, neo-pro into sort of knowing your roles and how those roles evolve and sort of moving forward. And then that's that reshaping the dream portion as well. So,
and when you say, because when you say reshaping the dream there, I guess, David, of course, I would say most cyclists, they start off with an ambition to be an individual winner, right?
Yes.
And to be a leader, if you like, in a team. And obviously that doesn't evolve for very many of them. And that's where, in the transition phase we talk about there, we have that for some, what's called a vocational phase, where actually they see this as being obviously their passion, but it's also to an extent a job. It's what they do. But it's also interesting for me, coming from the business world, because, when you look at the way companies work, organizations work, often they have very career transition phases in terms of the way they manage their talent. So, of course, you might go and study a university degree and then you join a company as a trainee. Then that's a period. Then you go on to perhaps being an individual contributor. Then you may be spotted to go to a team leadership role. Then if you're good at that, you may become maybe a departmental or functional head. But organizations actually have thought this through. So they give people, in a way, clear direction in terms of how these phases are going to evolve, and even in many cases, how long each one of those phases will be. However, my experience is in the world of pro sport and pro cycling, it's not always as transparent as that, right?
Well, I dare say that there wouldn't be many professional teams that actually have that phase mapped out at all, and I think that has a lot to do with the way the sport is run as well, because an athlete doesn't necessarily stay in the same team, or doesn't the majority of the time across all phases. So their role within a structure, not all careers and contracts are created equal. People are cherry picked at the same, obviously the same with the corporate world, for roles within a structure, and they may not be physiologically as good as a different candidate. However, they bring the whole to the team, and that's what the team is looking for. So that's where that specialization portion comes in as well. So how an athlete specializes, because you can come into the professional peloton thinking that you're going to win the Tour de France every day, but unless you have the physical capabilities of doing that, and you only know that once you know what world class actually is, and your pecking order on that, where that world class is specifically to that target, that you can actually then sort of move forward into the next phases of that career.
Interesting.
Which brings into that mastery section.
So, it was very interesting. We recently had Heinrich Hausler staying with us here at the Flandern Hotel, and he was here over the winter for the cyclocross season, really striving, to stay at the top end of the sport. He's 38 years old, and it really struck me, sitting and talking with him over dinner, in a way, how he was describing these phases, but he was able to do that in hindsight, looking back, and how he'd evolved into it, and very much seeing himself today in this, in a way, vocational stage, where his role is as a team captain, as a mentor, as a supporter to the younger members in the team. So in a way, he seemed very comfortable and understanding where he was. Also brilliantly having his contract extended, I think, for 3 years, but also with a very clear vision of, now that he was in that late phase, thinking about what was coming next. Right. So what is the most difficult period? Because again, if I talk about the business world, one of the other things that, in a way, I think corporates can do well is they start to identify, particularly when people are in their late 20s or 30s, they say, well, you know what, this person really, their aspiration is to be an individual contributor. They don't have aspirations to become a team leader or a functional head or the next CEO. That's just not what they want. That's not what drives them. So let's just support them to be that individual expert, technical specialist, whatever. On the other hand, there are some talents who say, no, I want to lead people. I want to be a manager. I want to do things. So again, as an athlete, as a pro athlete, how do you start to work that out for yourself? You know, what should my career path be? Not just my sporting path in terms of the races I ride or the, you know, the roles that I play.
So that's where that support network comes in as well. But also, once you get into the phase of that specialization phase, you find out what it takes to become the best in the world at what you're specifically going to do, or within that specialization, and then from that, there's that learning curve of what I need to do to then progress within that specialization phase of then getting to that next level. So an individual within this sport, it is not really clearly defined at all. You need quality peers around you, and you need a quality network of support around you to be able to understand what these phases are, and then work through these phases as your career progresses. And it's obvious that Heinrich has people around him in maybe more so now than what he did earlier in his career, to then work out what these transitions and have a not a clear defined direction, but a direction that is defined enough for him to continue to move forward in whatever phase he chooses.
Yeah, understood. And I guess is that, and then I guess that also comes down to, again, if I again relate it to the business world, you know, what you often see in the business world is organizations create mentoring programs, right? So they try to pair up or partner, say, more senior, more experienced, seasoned people with the younger, you know, high potentials or talents. So there is that exchange in a way. I'd be curious to hear from Brent at this point. You know, Brent, did you, in your career, to what extent did you have an opportunity for that kind of mentoring or advice from, people who were perhaps older than you, later stage? Was that something you sought out or received?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely sought that out. Definitely, I received it also. Probably early in my career, I received it unsolicited. Maybe didn't want it. And with the hindsight and maturity now, I'm thinking, well, should have listened up there. Could have got a few more tips. But no, as I went through my career, I started to mine that information and experience around me a little more, and became really interested about how riders went about that process and how they saw their roles or their time within the sport, and then how they were planning for what's next. And yeah, I think I observed and watched some riders, like we were talking about. You can always carve out a little bit of time to invest and work on that.
Yes.
But I'll admit, at the time when I was going through it, I did look at some riders and think, hey man, you're missing the boat. You're missing your chance. Like, you're off like planning for this, and you should be, fully immersed in what you're doing now. So it's difficult when you're really in it, and it is your prime, and you want to make good on that. But yeah, I think ultimately as athletes, it's up to us to be able to observe and accept, and then filter out what is going to work for us and what isn't. And that's one of the skills of being a pro.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Brent. Thanks for your input. And hear you loud and clear, man, because honestly, here we, presenting these webinars, putting them out to the world. And I tell you, we've had here staying with us, we've had some development teams in over the last few weeks with young riders. Like, I'm talking riders here in their late teens, early 20s. I'm saying, hey guys, we've got these webinars going and stuff. And they're like, I don't know if I really want to think about that right now. Like, that's too far away. I just want to think about now. So yeah, I understand that. I really do understand that's kind of the here and now of where they are. However, I guess when I still hear that from riders who are in their late 20s or early 30s, then I start to get a little bit concerned, concerned. because
Yes.
there is a sense of inevitability in terms of the transition that we'll approach. And actually, I think that's a good time, David, to turn to sort of our next topic, because of course, you know, for many riders, and I think we would include, you know, Brent in this sort of way of thinking. You know, for some of them, they are actually thinking about retirement. They're planning for it. You know, they've done what they want to do as an athlete. They've, you know, made a decision that they're going to make this shift, and they explain it to the team, and it's planned. You know, for others, it's not that way, right?
Absolutely.
So, and I've seen in my own experience both sides, of course. What in a way for you, David, differentiates these two? You know, because there are those people, you know, Brent, I mean, Mitch Docker, maybe we talk about later, Adam Hansen, who we know well, who definitely are on the left side of this equation, and then there are others on the other side. What is it for you, David, that separates these two?
Planning. It's actually just one word: planning. And also understanding the determinants of what each phase actually looks like, and then what could happen, and you're not catastrophizing when you're doing that at any stage, but what you're doing is giving yourself a tool set for if and only if something happens. Yeah. So even within, and this is not cycling specific when it comes to this either, like at any stage, like we have Formula One drivers that have could have a catastrophic accident and then their career's over. So they've gone from being this person to someone that they're not. But one, they have to work through that trauma, but then what does that look like? But again, everything just comes back to planning and effective management of what the next phase may look like, and because that next phase may happen far quicker than what anyone wishes. And that's when that doesn't happen, it comes up on someone, and life comes up pretty quick. And you know, I know that as a now scarily middle-aged man, that life comes at you quite quickly, right. and that planning phase is super important. So yeah, again, that's
I think, you know, if we just think about road cycling in the last months, you know, whether it was Bernal crashing into the back of a bus, if it's Cobrelli recently with his heart problems, and I'm not saying that for either of these riders their careers are over, but obviously these are very unplanned events which suddenly bring into the light that you may have to, you know, make another choice, and that's difficult. I mean, the other thing here, I guess, is that there is an aspect here which is about readiness, is it not? Because you talk about planning. Okay. Yes. We can all have even I think for anyone, we always need a contingency. Yes. Right? If I was to ride into the back of a bus tomorrow, what would be my plan B? Okay, I go back to university, I go and work to get a vocation. It's at least just having an idea of what that contingency might be. And that doesn't take a lot of time or energy, but it gives you some sense of security. However, the other thing that I've seen the difference between is that, you know, I have met athletes who have had, in a way, a traumatic end because of their career because of an accident or sudden contract you know, cancellation. And yet they've seemed ready to jump into a new phase. Yeah. Others I've met, I would almost describe as being in a state of denial. Can you talk about the difference between the two there?
So the change readiness portion, some people are change averse regardless of whether this is or not. And that comes again on a spectrum of where that sits. Some people are quite adept to change, just in an overall personality profile sense of the word. But others need people around them to be able to help them with that adaptation to change. And the clear understanding of this is understand yourself and understanding the self enough to know whether you are change averse or not. And if you are, who are the people in my life that can help me facilitate change if and when that happens. So from that perspective, find out where you sit and then bring people around you that that complement your weaknesses and engage your strengths to then move forward.
Yeah, yeah. Understood. Understood.
Yeah.
But isn't that also, in a way, one of the things which I think is quite unique to what I've observed with pro cyclists is that when a pro cyclist is evolving in their career, and often from a very young age, things are given to them, you know, initially the bicycle, some clothing, some shoes, but they experience this for many years actually. And not only things are given to them, their washing is done, their hotel rooms are booked, their travel is taken care of. So actually there's a lot of things that even they may take for granted, actually, all these things being done for them. But one of the other things I've heard is that sometimes people, you know, because when you're a professional athlete, also people like being around you, you know, like you're in demand. But what you often see is those people who most want to be around you, they want to be around you because they perceive they get something in return, i.e. they get your halo of success, they get your status, your prestige, and so on. And I was on a ride with a pro cyclist late last year, and he was really bitter actually. And he was saying, yeah, all these people, you know, once my career, once I stopped racing, nobody called me anymore. You know, nobody wanted to be doing things with me anymore. And his expectation was that would kind of continue, you know, like people wanting to be around him and involve him in things. And so he was quite bitter about that. And I think I would describe him as someone who had low readiness for this change. You know, he was really wanting things to be the way it was before. And that there was a bit of bitterness there. So is there any particular advice or recommendations you'd give to people to try to avoid, in a way, developing that sense of being the center?
Yeah. So again, that's the people around you, really. That is your performance bubble. But that again, from the start of where we were right at the start of this, your performance bubble is a performance bubble when it comes to athletic ability. Now your bubble, as we transition to this, the performance bubble changes. You know, how do you get the people around you, and how do you infuse the knowledge of others in yourself to understand what the determinants are for each and every aspect of what life may or may not look like moving forward. You know, so what is the change that is going to happen? How is that going to happen? And what will it look like? Like 99% of the time, athletes will be removed from a career, and that will actually happen because the people who are in your world because they're also in that world, or they want to be in that world. Yeah. So you're moving away from that world, and you may stay within professional cycling. However, your role within that changes. So the people around you will also evolve. So yeah.
And that also, I guess, relates to this idea of, again, maybe I'll talk about some specific cases as we go along, but this idea of lacking options, you know, that, you know, and you see that many, and again, you can even look at some of the data on this. We've talked in the previous webinars about the issue of financial challenges post-career. But one of the interesting things you see often also is that people define their options in terms of cycling. So you see many pro cyclists open a bike shop, start a coaching business, go into giving cycling tours, because they think that's my only option. Because in many ways, they're defining themselves according to cycling and skills related to cycling. Yeah. Whereas others I've met, and in fact, I think a brilliant example of that is someone like Michael Rogers, who's currently the head of the road program at the UCI, who really understood late in his career that he had talents beside his skills. And those talents were related to leadership and communication, actually a fascination and a deep insight into how technology was evolving and could be applied. So post-career, in a way, you know, Michael didn't go and open a bike shop. Michael went and said, how can I apply these talents that I have in other career paths and roles, which ultimately led him to be innovation manager and then overall road director at the UCI. So again, can you maybe talk to that sense of identity where we think about ourselves not just as cyclists and technical skills related to cycling, but talents, values, and perhaps even passions?
Yeah. So as we've spoken about before, like sport is just a microcosm of your personality traits as such. So what you struggle with and what you do really well within the sport are actually the things that will see you through a very healthy professional career post cycling. You know, and the things and your weaknesses within the sport are the weaknesses that you will need to work on, because they will be your weaknesses within all other areas and aspects of life as well. So again, the tools or the resources that an athlete or a support staff are looking for here is personality traits, actually. So what do people like about you? What are the endearing qualities of you? What are your strengths when it comes to the team environment? You know, because they're the things that will put you in good stead to move forward, and that change averseness will come across to that change readiness. So that will move across into that. But that doesn't actually necessarily mean that you have to like this phase either. Like this phase is like all phases are difficult, and the change, no human likes change. They're very people are stuck in their ways. Like I turn the tap on exactly the same way, and I turn the doorknob the same way. Like things that are familiar are safe. Yeah. And when it becomes when there's the change looks like it may happen, your frontal lobe kicks in and goes, what if?
Yeah.
So that what if is it can be a positive or a negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the good portion is what if.
Yeah.
The world's your oyster. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So use those personality traits.
A great point there as well, David. And I think, and Brent's actually put a question there in the chat box related to, you know, how do we get to know ourselves? And actually, there are definitely, you know, there are diagnostics there. There's Myers-Briggs type indicators. There's other diagnostics that you can do. So I think what we can do in the webinar notes for this webinar, we can put some recommended resources there.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things we do here at the Flandrian Hotel, we run a program called the Flandrian Entrepreneurship Program, where we bring people in, often late stage athletes, some of them in early stages of retirement, but we also work with entrepreneurs who are podcasters and people running fashion brands and so on. And what we actually do there is we put them through several of these diagnostics. The other thing we do actually, and this doesn't cost you anything, it just is a little bit of time, is we do exactly what you've just described. We actually have a little workbok we get them to complete where they interview other people about themselves. How would you describe me? What would you say are my strengths? What are my talents? What are my awesome? And actually you learn a lot. But the other thing to start listening for, and often this comes, I would say often it can happen already in a young age, but certainly by your late 20s or early 30s, people will start telling you you're a good communicator. People will start telling you, you know, oh, you're really great at dealing with conflict. Or they'll start telling you, oh, you're really inspiring, you know, the way that you talk to the young riders, you know. So when you hear people telling you you're good at something, don't just shrug it off. You know, if someone tells you you're great at something, say, well, hey, maybe I am. And then the question becomes, how can I then build upon that inner talent? And then how can I apply that talent in the work that I do? Because
how do you utilize that skill? Exactly.
Yeah. And, you know, once you realize you're good at something, and if you enjoy doing it, then it doesn't become such a chore to actually, you know, improve upon it and strengthen it. Look, another very important point, I think, David, also, which we haven't touched upon actually, is the partner in the equation, because of course many athletes are married, have a significant other, husband, wife, and the big struggle also sometimes is that when you have had a relationship which is defined upon this role as an athlete, and then that role will transition and change. Now, again, if I talk about Heinrich Hassel, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with what he shared with us, but we had a real sense talking to him that he always said we. You know, when he was talking about the future, he was talking about us and we, and he was constantly talking about his wife and how the two of them are in a partnership, and that partnership is constantly evolving. And for us, that really struck us as unique, but also gave us a lot of confidence that he and his wife would succeed in that transition because they're already working on it. What's your experience there, David?
My experience is, again, that happens with the best in the world and the best that do that transition do that. That is a we. They have, it is a partnership and across the board, because sometimes the partner is only doing this as what they think is a short term. It's a short term solution for the partner, is their partner being an athlete, right? So I'm prepared to do this portion while your athletic career is happening, but then I would like this portion the next. And if that isn't talked through, then conflict occurs, and then there's the resentment occurs, and then from that perspective, and you do this really well with your seminars and what you do at the hotel, is how do we create a partnership of what does your unit need? So if you've got kids, if you've got a wife, is your partner, what is the vision, and what's the purpose in overall life, and how does that apply to what you're doing now and what you're going to be doing in the future?
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
Sit down and have a really decent conversation. That's something that you actually got me to do at one stage, is sit down with my partner and go through what we actually want out of it. And we hadn't done that, and it was absolutely a breath of fresh air. And so that toolbox is something that I hadn't been experienced. And then when given that, it changed our outlook.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I think that's definitely, we see that time and time again. And actually the exercise that you're talking about, I've done with many current former pro cyclists, and it is a revelation, and it's a very simple exercise. You literally just sit down with your partner and say, what does a good life look like for us 3 years from now? Where do we want to be living? What do we want our relationship to be in terms of time with the kids and our in-laws and all that stuff? What are our hobbies, our passions? What do we want to keep going there? And then career, what do we see evolving? And the sad thing is that often you do see post-career that those two pictures do not overlap. And often there's a relationship breakdown there, which makes, of course, the transition all the more complicated. Not only thinking about the career path, but thinking about potentially a relationship breakdown and how you're going to deal with that, which nobody wants. Nobody's heads into that, wanting that.
And an athlete's away for 200 days a year as well. So there's a new dynamic when it comes to what that relationship is. So if you come back into the husband's life and he's been at work or looking after the children or whatever, or vice versa, whether that's a husband or wife looking after the children, so it's they're the rulers of that domain. You're going back into that that so you have to understand where your role is within this. So,
but David, actually, again, I mean, that is actually, if we look at the research on retirement, here we're talking about traditional retirement at 60, 65 years old. Actually, the research also shows us a very high number of relationship breakdowns at that phase of life, actually, for exactly the reason you've talked about, because suddenly the husband or wife who has been largely absent every day, away from the home from 9 to 7, suddenly they're around all the time. And, I think, I'm sure Brent is listening very attentively now, because Brent, you're experiencing this right now. How are you finding it? Suddenly being home all the time, being, and I'm sure, I'm not sure about you, but, I used to travel a lot with my career, and it was when I got back, and I was pretty hopeless actually in terms of household and kids and stuff like that. And, how are you finding it, Brent?
Yeah, it's an adjustment. I'd say, talking about all this, talking about the path through the career, talking about the consideration and the process of retiring, or that decision, and then actually doing it. Each one of those is this like journey and path that I feel like there's like a spectrum of process in each one of those. And what I'm realizing, just like the two processes before this one I'm in now, I would like go back and forth on the steps of it all the time. And fortunately, I have the perspective of going through the career one and the decision to retire to kind of comfort me a little bit, and hopefully allow me to have a little bit of self-compassion now to know that it's okay. Like I am like going back and forth, and some days it's awesome and great. Other days it's tweaking me and I'm in a headlock and yeah, not sure what to do. So it's challenging, but I think the acceptance that it's okay to, it's not, they're not stepping stones that you go to the next one and you can't go back to the one before. It's a back and forth process. And once I've gotten to grips with that, which I only got to with the help of a lot of other people, it became easier to process. So it's a work in progress. I have not perfected it, Jamie, but we're working on it.
Absolutely.
But do you think that the skill set that you had through your cycling career, that a lot of the things that you were good at, you're finding that that you're good at now, like post career stuff as well?
Yeah, most definitely. And that there's a process of empowerment that comes with that. I think when I was considering how my career was going to end, and I was considering that way earlier than it did, I was often scared of and viewing it in that traumatic process in a way, and I had this fear about that. And then through a lot of process and work, I did start to plan and gain some awareness and realize some of those strengths and skills, like you guys said. And yeah, now I'm seeing that I am able to transfer a lot of those from my career into what I'm doing now and what possibility the future holds as well. And it's exciting and empowering and comforting to know that, none of us come out of the sport, totally empty handed with nothing to give. Everyone has a skill set and an experience that can be applied and carried forward, but it's a matter of figuring out what that is and then how to best direct it.
Yeah. Well, geez, Brent, we've been, it's certainly been an experience for us working with you, right? Because here you come out of your pro career and then you become part of the Pro Cyclist Foundation, and suddenly you're cracking the whip with me and David and keeping us on our toes and planning and scheduling, and we're doing rehearsals together. And it's also awesome seeing you developing the new skills, the confidence to speak to an audience, developing the technology skills with the YouTube and the editing. And I mean, it's cool. It's cool. It's great to see you embracing that. But I think this is what we talked about earlier, David. Right? It's the readiness to try something new, just to jump into it and try. And if you're good at it, keep doing it. And you'll build your confidence. And I think, Brent, we've seen that with you over the course of these 3 webinars. Just your confidence building as the experience comes, and then the new skills that come along with that. So that's
been very rewarding from my perspective as well. Like, it's really rewarding, like seeing that move forward. And that's as an aside, but see, like from our perspective, looking at working with athletes, that's the most rewarding portion of our work, is seeing the progression and the athlete understanding that it's still okay to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
It was okay to make mistakes when you were an athlete. It was okay to make mistakes when you were a neo or moving into each career transition. But what happens quite often is because you're older and you're what you perceive as wiser, you don't let yourself you think that you need to be perfect in each that career transition, and you actually don't have to be.
If anything, I'd say the standard we hold us to as athletes is actually higher than what we need to do now. What I found I need to do now, like the expectation.
Hey, hang on a second. What are you saying?
But they're highly desirable qualities.
Yeah, what I mean is, I think the process of trying something and eliminating it, trying and failing, or trying knowing I don't like it, or trying and moving on, that's actually a success. Whereas in the sporting world, trying and failing, it's hard to wrap your head around, and it's not always rewarded in the same way. But the process of elimination is a movement of progress.
But a great comment. And actually, I think someone, I'd love to mention at this stage, because it's someone I got to know well over the last few years, is Mitch Docker, and I think if anyone really embodies this just try it, attitude, and through that process of trying something new, actually understanding your talents, understanding that you have a passion for something, and then developing that as a skill set, it's definitely Mitch, because Mitch did have this passion and interest to share. Actually, his initial vision actually with the Life in the Peloton, if those of you haven't listened to it, is Mitch's wonderful, podcast that he ran over many years of his career, where he really started off with a vision of just wanting to share what life was like in the Peloton to his family back home in Australia. And actually that just evolved into an international phenomenon with thousands of listeners all over the world. And in that process, it was very interesting because Mitch, started to understand that he had these talents in entertaining people, communicating with people, interviewing. And then when he realized he was okay at that, then he started investing actually in acquiring the skills to do that at a more and more professional level. Now, of course, what came with that as it evolved, very interesting. Now, of course, he was doing all of this beside a very successful pro career, by the way, being a key contributor in the teams that he was in. But then, of course, what started happening with that international visibility and with him emerging as a brand actually was that he also had to learn some new skills in terms of negotiating with potential sponsors and collaborators like the Cycling Podcast, who he was working with as well. And I think a great example. Now, the other thing with Mitch, of course, is he did end his career on his own terms. He planned for that. He's making a transition. He's moved now back to Australia with his family. And I spoke to him recently. He's doing great. And I think when we talk about someone like Mitch and we see what he did throughout his career, what you do see is that there are certain, steps that people can take to increase this likelihood of success. Okay. Now, again, David, maybe you'd like to talk to this because you've mentioned it again and again throughout these webinars, is in a way understanding yourself, your values and your identity. Can you say a little bit more about that, and then how that in a way transitions to, working out your skills and then planning perhaps next career steps?
So when it comes to this portion, it is the overarching theme when it comes to this is understanding yourself and being honest and having an honest evaluation with yourself. And then from that, there's a lot of skills that you have as a professional athlete that are highly desirable within a commercial interest outside of sport. So even though you may not think that you're very good at this, your time management, your ability to be able to do things that you actually don't want to do, because there's a lot of times that you don't want to go and race your bike in Belgium when it's -6 and sleeting sideways,
Which it was today, by the way, David.
Yes, yeah.
Preparing for this weekend.
Yeah, and so your ability to do that and understanding your pluses and minuses is really important in how you then posit yourself to go from one phase to the next. And the career transition phase is understanding that your frontal lobe is going to actually say to yourself, I'm scared here. I don't know what's going to happen. And the thing is, you don't have to know. You just, you have, a journey starts with one step at a time, and you have to understand roundabout where you're going, but there's branches in trees and you can make decisions in each phase. And it's okay to make mistakes in regards to that. So, yeah.
The thing definitely I would advise though, David, is to try to make small mistakes.
Yes, absolutely.
When I say small, especially financially, again,
yes.
One of the risks that you have is that when you're an athlete, you have a lot of energy. And also you have focus. So what happens when you have energy and focus together? That is right? Because that is moving forward. That's executing. The risk is when you finish your career and you don't give yourself the time to reflect and introspect about really where do I want to channel my energy. The risk is you have a lot of energy, but you don't have focus. And what does that mean? That means distraction and actually risk, because the risk there is you end up investing or jumping into projects or opportunities that actually are not a fit with you, with your values, with your character, and that can be damaging both in terms of your confidence, but also definitely financially. So definitely have a think about, you know, where it is you really feel your talents are, and then try to move in that direction, even if you don't have a lot of clarity.
Also, I understand that your brain and the brain function is that of a highly performing athlete. You know, if you just stop a athletic career cold, and then think to yourself in 6 weeks time, geez, I feel terrible. I don't know why I'm feeling terrible. You know, I think I may have a decrement to my mood. It's because you're not getting the endorphins, and you're not getting, you're not moving your body to, your brain is used to a certain set of criteria of within phases in each time. So if, again, it's a transition, it's not a cold break. So one of the clear targets, I think, with athletes is you can't just stop exercising. As soon as you stop exercising, the ones that stop exercising over and over and over again, I see as a high percentage of them that have an issue.
Absolutely agree. I think
with
that
their mental health.
If you think about, I mean, all the aspects we're talking about here, many of which we've already touched upon, the wrapper around that is continuing to look after your health, your being, and related to that, of course, of many of the chemical elements we talked about, the dopamine, the endorphins, which is as well. But look, there's a very important aspect here, I think, that we should talk about too, David. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, is that we talked about change readiness. And if you relate to an athlete, an athlete is always ready to improve their performance. So if they think they can improve their performance through nutrition, they'll reach out to a nutritionist. If they think that they can improve their performance through a new coaching method, they will reach out to the new coach. When we start moving into this new transition into a potential life after cycling and potential careers, one of the other things we need to do is reach out to people. So one of the things that I do actively, and again, if I talk about someone like Michael Rogers, Alan Davis, who also is a great friend of mine who I've supported, who's now working, of course, as a sports director with Lotto. One of the things that we worked on was really identifying who are people out there in the world who can bring experience to you, bring knowledge to you. So, and I'm sure Michael wouldn't mind me saying, but when Michael was looking at that real drive that he had to try to make an impact on cycling, and therefore wanting to get involved with the UCI, then what we did was say, okay, well, who do you know who has interacted with the UCI at the senior level, and who are those stakeholders, and who are those people? So, of course, he then actually spent time calling people, having coffee with people, seeking input on this is where I might be going in my next phase of life. What's your experience? So again, I think one of the things that people often feel is very alone. And you don't need to be alone, because actually most people, if you send them an email, you give them a call, they're more than willing to have a coffee, to have a Zoom chat with you, and to share their wisdom with you. People love to do that, but you have to be proactive in seeking that out. Don't expect that someone's going to come knocking on your door and say, oh, I want to give you this advice, right? However, you can only really reach out to well, I'm not saying the right people, but you only know who to reach out to when you have an idea of at least the direction you want to move in. And if you want to become a DS, talk to other DSs who've made that shift. If you want to end up in a high performance role, talk to people who are there. Does that make sense to you, David?
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, you'd be surprised of the network that you have around you, like even to the point of other athletes' siblings or other athletes' parents or other, like if you just reach out and have a decent have a look at the support network that you have around you, it is almost infinite. There is like 6 degrees of separation, right? So it doesn't really take much to find somebody who is good at a specific thing that you need them, from what you need. There may just be 2 emails to get you to somebody. So again, that network of association is really super important. And if you do feel alone, that's when you reach out. So that's the strength.
And in fact, of course, that's what, I mean, this is really why the Pro Cyclist Foundation is here. And that's why we're associated with the Pro Cyclist Foundation, is that is really a role also that the foundation will play over time. So, you know, if you're listening to this either live today or certainly watching the recording in the future, if you do feel a need, then definitely, you know, connect with the Pro Cyclist Foundation. What we will be sharing certainly after this webinar is a way to do that for those of you who are listening live. If you do watch this further down the course, then of course you just go to the Pro Cyclist Foundation website, and there you will find contacts and resources to support you in that. The other thing, of course, is that, you know, in over the last couple of years, not only have I mentored and supported many athletes, I've also interviewed many of them, including Mitch Docker. Adam Hansen, who you see here in this photograph, is another athlete who I think was absolutely brilliant in terms of the way of thinking through his career as a cyclist. And he also saw it as a phase, you know, in his life, that it wasn't, you know, the only phase. It was just one phase in his long life. And who also has made an incredible transition. Also, as you've mentioned, David, someone who has an incredible network of connections, yes, leveraged those connections over the course of his career. So we actually, at the Flandrian Hotel, we also have a YouTube channel, and there we have interviews about transitions with people like Adam Hansen, Michael Rogers, Alan Davis, a lot of Aussies I'm mentioning here, Dave, because I'm an Aussie, and I got a lot of those Aussies in my network.
Nothing wrong with being Australian.
No, nothing wrong with that. But, you know, saying that, I think there is an element here also, you know, again, we talked about this in previous webinars. One of the things that struck me talking to the Aussies that I spoke to is that because they did leave and travel so far from home, they were very aware of the risks, you know, the potential of a crash or you know, the end of a contract. So they always had in the back of the mind that home was far away, and they were more conscious in a way, I think, of preparing for that transition as well.
Also a sense of resilience, because they had to be. Yeah,
very true. But anyway. All right, so very good. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat box as well. But, you know, I think the key here to summarize is that, again, if we look at the visual here, you can be prepared. You know, you can start to think about this transition you're going to have in your life. And the key thing, as we mentioned, is not to try to do it alone. Reach out to others. Don't hesitate to seek out support, and be sure, if you're in a relationship, to involve your significant other in these discussions, in this thought process, because it is about the we, not the me, as you start to evolve through this shift. David, from you, I mean, just in terms of your maybe a summary from you for those who you've seen do it well, what is it that they've done especially different to just really make that transition easy for themselves?
So for me, what they've done is they've done career planning early and often. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be one large chunk. They do it in very small little increments that then leads to a whole. So it doesn't have to be something that is, oh, okay, this is actually happening right now. It needs to be done right now. The ones that do it extremely well and transition across all phases are the ones that do small little increments consistently over time to get to a whole. And that's really what you're doing when it comes to your physiological career as well. Small increments over time gives you a whole. Yeah. So it's exactly what we're doing across not only mental health when it comes to the webinar series that we've had before, but this transition portion is also exactly the same structure of little and often. Mm-hmm. And little and often is far better than trying to make a jump across one side of the river to the other, especially when there's a bridge you can actually take and use small steps to walk across that bridge. So, yeah.
Great input, David. And, you know, David, I turned 51 this year, and, you know, I'm in a transition right now. I just, you know, yes. I opened a hotel. I'm, you know, embracing cycling as a huge part of my life and my career right now. And yeah, I've been through this exercise over the last 12 months, actually thinking about where is the next 3 to 5 years, but not doing it alone, having that discussion with my wife and my kids. So, you know, it's never too late for a comeback, David. That's what I say. And
Well,
it's certainly never
yes.
too late. Never too late for, well, when I say comeback, we're talking about a comeback to life and a comeback to other aspects of life. Brent, we'd love to invite you back into the chat as well, just to hear your reflections, and of course to close the webinar for us, say a few words, of course, about the Pro Cyclist Foundation and what people can expect next.
Yeah, on behalf of the foundation, really a pleasure to bring this webinar project to our audience and our participants. Really big thank you to Professor Jamie Anderson and Dr. Spindler and Ramandeep for all the support. Like I said, this is a new project for us, getting this going, and I think we feel good about it. We feel good that we could, start this conversation and provide this expertise and knowledge and education to everyone who tuned in. And we'll look forward to interacting with all of you, as we go along. So, like I said, please take a minute, fill out that feedback link, shoot us an email, let us know what you're up to, and we're inspired and passionate about developing a relationship with you all as riders, and want to support you first and foremost. So, again, big thanks to Professor Anderson and Dr. Spindler for helping us do that, support you, and educate cyclists on this webinar series, and we'll look forward to keep going and seeing you in other projects as well.
Excellent. Okay, Brent, thank you very much. As Brent mentioned, for those of you watching live tonight, please do click on that feedback link in the chat box. And of course, for those of you who are watching this as a recording, please do go to the Pro Cyclist Foundation YouTube channel, where you will find the previous webinars, and of course, over the course of the next months and years, much more content to help you all, of course, as we started this webinar talking about, to shine like a star. So with that, we'll bring the webinar to a close. Brent Buchalter, David Spindler, of course, Ramandeep Singh, thank you very much for your support over the course of the webinars, and wishing everyone out there watching this every success for the future. So thanks, everyone.